presents the St. Louis City Soccer Report on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
Welcome into the downtown studios of KMOX. I'm Jennifer Cease, Nate Gatter alongside for our second St. Louis City Soccer Report. But this time, as we get ready to go into two games of the week. First, the CONCACAF Champions League with St. Louis City playing on Tuesday night against the Houston Dynamo. And then Real comes in on Saturday for the first game of the MLS season. Welcome in, Nate.
Yeah, it's going to be a big week, obviously, with the next season starting. And we've had now the end of this preseason work. And you got a chance to talk to a whole bunch of people this week and kind of get us ready for what's going to be happening.
It was my first media scrum, so it was pretty awesome.
Your first one ever?
Ever. So I've been in the press conference room, so did that with Coach Carnell, of course, used to that. Usually like you get coach and a couple of players come in, but it was the first time in the Minetta Pitch Club below. They had all the chairs and all the players were standing there. And I was like a kid in a candy store with a microphone running around getting what I could.
That sounds a little bit too classy.
It was fun.
I don't know if that really qualifies as your first media scrum. I think that's supposed to happen like in a back alley behind a stadium somewhere.
They treated us really well. They even provided us some food. It was nice and it was fun. Although I will tell you, they were just as giddy, I think, to start the season as everybody else is. More than one times I had to admonish Klaus or Celio to leave my person I'm interviewing alone. You had your turn. Stop.
Yeah, you can't blame them for having enthusiasm, and we're going to hear a lot of voices today. Dale Schilly will be with us next, as he almost always is in our first hour, to talk about what he's expecting this week and looking ahead to the season. We'll visit with George Gansner at the end of this first hour, as we do for Laws of the Game, talking about the news that came out just in the last day or two that the referees union officially voted resoundingly to reject the potential new collective bargaining agreement. So we will officially begin the MLS season this week with replacement referees. So we'll talk to George about what that's going to look like and how, in what ways and to what degree fans might notice that, even casual fans who maybe haven't been following this and will go into watching the first game having no idea that anything has changed with the referees. In the second hour, we will visit with Tom Timmerman, who's a frequent guest, a friend of the show from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, who, of course, covers St. Louis City, and he always has a lot of insights, especially around this time of year. I think he is probably as on the inside as anyone unaffiliated.
He went
with
down
the
to
club.
Florida for a bit too and saw them play.
And I think he's pretty much the only person who's boots on the ground during the preseason, even when the team is away from St. Louis, obviously outside of the club structure itself. So I think he's a great person to talk to. And then Megan McCormick, who we were just talking about last week because she was part of your event at the Missouri History Museum, your women in soccer event on Thursday night. And you were saying how much you've been wanting to get her on the show, and she's going to be with us in the second hour.
I did. It was very helpful when you're working that. Then you can run right up to him and say, "Hey, can I book you on the show?" And she's like, "Absolutely." Because today is actually not only do the women in soccer event on Thursday. Today there's another event at the History Museum. Dave Lang is going to be signing copies of his year one, and it's the last day for the Soccer City exhibit. So actually, I brought my son Liam, who's here today in a studio, not here because I don't trust him on a microphone. And we're going to run over there and try to get Mr. McDermott, Bill, Mr. Soccer, will be kind of doing a little panel. And it's the last day. If you haven't seen it, this is it.
This is your moment to get in there. So all of that will also, as mentioned, have a whole slew of comments from not only Bradley Carnell, but several players that Jen collected for us this week. And we will get to some of those during the first hour as well. So there's a lot to do. But if you have comments or questions or just anything you want to share about the upcoming season, the number to get involved is 314-436-7900. That's 314-436-7900. You can also tweet us at KMOX Sports. Kyle Sixta is back in the studio with us running things, and he will keep a watchful eye on what might be coming in over the Twitterverse. Jen, just before we get to a break and talk to Dale, I think, one of the things that we've done in the past is sometimes have a sort of a question that we're focusing on throughout the show, a little bit of a theme, especially if it's something that we can ask several of our guests. And one of the things I've been thinking about, especially because there has been some, but not a tremendous amount of roster turnover from year one to year two. I would say a little bit less than is typical for an expansion team because City did so well in their first season compared to what is typical. So they were doing more augmentation of the roster rather than overhaul. Do you have your eye on anyone in particular to break out, to take a big step forward and make either a first real impact or just a significantly bigger impact in year two?
Yeah, I do. I have one, and he's a favorite of mine from last year, Tomas Ostrak. I think and because Salio and Indy were sitting next to each other, and both of them made the point, kind of off the mic for me, but saying he's ready. Being an MLS veteran now, a lot of them talked about how this was new. Even Leuven saying, I did not really know what to expect from the season. I think I'm going to be able to train smarter, make sure I know when to rest my body, don't push when I don't need to push, right? And Ostrak apparently came in, ready, like really ready enough that he made an impression on kind of everybody around. So I'm excited to see how he might contribute as he always does. He's happy to contribute in every way, but maybe getting some more minutes and finding, I think, his place on this squad.
Yeah, that midfield group has only gotten deeper and more competitive.
That's right.
So
That's
certainly,
right.
I think this is I wouldn't say make or break, but a very important year for somebody like Ostrak, who could easily get lost among a lot of other talented players.
True. And the other one, of course, and he's new, he's not new and new. He's 8-year veteran, but Chris Durkin is a holding midfielder. We have often looked to Jabulo Blom to do a lot of those things. I really like some of his comments. He's, it's bittersweet for him. He's a homegrown player, already misses DC, but he's excited as ever for this. And I didn't even know that he and Klaus play together. So they call him Durkee. So it was fun to hear from him and to see how his experience in the league brings that to in depth for the roster.
Yeah, the experience in the league point is a good one, I think, too, because for all the talent in that midfield, there was certainly in the central midfield, there was essentially zero experience in MLS.
That's right.
With the exception of Indiana Vassilev having a little bit, but even he really wasn't experienced as a midfielder because they were sort of making him into a more of a true center midfielder rather than more of an attacking player over the course of last season. So if you set that aside, they had virtually zero experience as an MLS central midfielder in that group. And Chris Durkin does bring a lot of value there.
Yeah.
I've been turning over some names in my mind. We should take a break and get to Dale Schilly.
But you got to get one. Give me somebody.
You want one right away?
Give me one.
The one who comes to my mind, and this depends a little bit on how they're going to approach things formationally, but one of the things that we've speculated on is that they might, with the departure of Nico Gioacchini, play a little bit more solo striker at any given time, rather than having Klaus and Adeniran out there together, because at times that was somewhat problematic last year because of the similarities in their playing style. I prefer the press with two strikers to one, but I can see why with the personnel makeup of this team, it might make sense to experiment with one striker. And I think that will put more of an emphasis on the wingers than what we saw last year. I also think people are underselling the departure of Jared Stroud because of, if nothing else, even if you didn't like Jared Stroud as a player very much, the pure volume of minutes that he ate up. Right? Yeah. He played a lot of minutes especially on the left wing for City.
He will go work the opposite defenders in their midfield. He will go work them hard.
To me, it's two guys who stand out on the wing. First of all, Rasmus Alm, because I thought, especially in the first half of the season before he had his injury, there were times where I thought, outside of sort of the highest paid group of City players, like the Klaus Leuven Berkey triumvirate, that he was maybe City's most talented player at times, and he looked that way in the first half of last season before his injury. There were flashes where I was really impressed with his technical ability. I didn't think he demonstrated that as much in the second half. He also didn't get the consistent run in the team in the second half of the season that he did in the first half. So I would like to see him take a real step forward. I think he's capable of that. The other one, and this is, if anything, compared to how the fan base seems to love him, I'm more of a Celio Pompeu hater in that I think there are a lot of deficiencies in his game that are hidden by being a late game sub. It's sort of like how fans tend to love the backup quarterback because you haven't yet seen some of the deficiencies. He makes me a little bit nervous as, if you were going to go into a big game playing Celio Pompeu for 90 minutes, I would be a little concerned. But there's no doubt the opportunity is going to be there. I think because of, first of all, the relative lack of wing options compared to central midfield options now, and the fact that I think this might be for a single striker team at least more often than it was last year. So Alm kind of the headliner there, but I think Pompeu, if he keeps impressing the way he did in his relatively limited minutes last year, I expect there will be at least opportunity for him to grow that role.
To be seen.
To be seen. So, and we'll hear
Stay
from Dale
tuned.
Schilly. We'll hear from Tom Timmerman. Maybe we can even ask Megan if she has kind of a pick to click for the season, somebody who's really impressing. So we'll talk to Dale Schilly next. It's the St. Louis City Soccer Report on KMOX.
Attention contractors, it's Andrea and Scott at Best Buy Flooring. We've joined forces with Carpet for Less to open a location in
on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
The St. Louis
Yeah,
City.
we want to, try and be too deep on every position, right? So, and the competition drives then from within.
That's Bradley Carnell, who was talking this week to Jen Cease, among others. I think that question was in response to Tom Timmerman of the Post-Dispatch,
right.
or that answer was in response to a question from Tom Timmerman of the Post-Dispatch, who will be with us in the second hour. And he was commenting on a desire to be, too deep at every position, which obviously when you play the demanding style that City play.
I think they might be 3 or 4 with all the rotations last year.
They're certainly deeper this year than they were last year, and they'll need to be, in part because even last season, the legs, I think it's fair to say, for some players faded down the stretch of the season. And on top of that, they're adding CONCACAF Champions Cup starting just the night after tomorrow with the first official game of 2024 for City hosting Houston. 7 o'clock kickoff on Tuesday night, February the 20th, day after tomorrow. That'll be on our sister station, Y98. You will be able to hear our own Jen Cease on that call. And, of course, friend of the program, Dale Schilly, who joins us again now. Dale, to Bradley Carnell's point of wanting to be too deep at every position, how much of a step forward do you think City have made in pursuit of that goal compared to where they were at the end of last season?
Well, I mean, I think I think the club's made big strides there. I mean, when you look at positions on the field where players can get wore out because of the workload and the amount of effort and exertion and number of sprints that players have to do, outside back and center mids would have to be two of the most demanding positions that we need to fill. And, you know, with Durkin, with Totland, with Durr, we've been able to backfill those positions and add more, I think, more quality and more depth. And I think that, you know, that certainly will help as we, you know, jump out, as you said, just jump out of the gate with a Champions Cup match, a league match, followed by a Champions Cup match in 8 days.
Yeah, I think Bradley had said, you know, when you take all the 4 games in 11 days, so, you know, really testing player thresholds. I think if you're a player, you can be very excited about the fact that you are very likely potentially to see the field in that short period of time. What does that look like, Dale, in terms of trying to find some ways that we might look at the roster being kind of set, so to speak, and how much do you want to play with the movement? Like, we know that Bradley is used to rotating rosters. Will it be the same, you think, for the first 4 games or so?
That's a great question. I would think that we may see a rotation between games 1 and 2. And then depending upon what the score line looks like going into Houston for the second game, because aggregate scoring is in effect in Champions Cup, that we may see some changes there based on the score line. And then I think you'll see a complete reshuffle for the next league match because of just trying to figure out what the right combinations are. You know, if we and also it depends on if we advance to the next round. The next round, I believe, starts March 6th of the Champions Cup.
Dale, I don't want to put you in a position to speak for Bradley Carnell or Lutz Pfannenstiel or certainly the players, but I think a certain number of City fans, particularly if they're not necessarily European soccer fans and are now becoming club fans for the first time with having a local team, are, I guess, getting accustomed to the idea or learning about the idea of having these different competitions going on at once. And we saw last year that not only for the U.S. Open Cup, which I think a lot of American fans would consider sort of a secondary competition, but for the Leagues Cup, which was supposed to have a little more prestige to it, the ticket prices were lower on the secondary market. Generally, there were still good attendance, but the interest was a little bit lower than league games. In now CONCACAF Champions Cup being sort of the most prestigious, the continental competition, the American version, the North American version, and Central American version of the Champions League, if you will, in Europe, how much importance do you think the club are placing on the Champions Cup relative to MLS?
Well, I would think that here in the beginning that there's a fair amount of importance to it. I think Bradley's looking at this opening round as a very important step for the club to be able to advance to the next round. And particularly when we're talking about really one game that's in question in terms of the league, our home opener. I would think that he's putting a big emphasis on this. And where Leagues Cup falls after that, who knows? Where does Bradley's emphasis go as Champions Cup progresses? If we're able to move on into later rounds, kind of depends on how we're doing in the standings in the MLS and our performance and who we're playing against in Champions Cup. There's a lot of factors going to come into play. But I would say right out of the gate, you're going to see Bradley and the club put their best foot forward.
spent some time in the presser with all the players kind of sitting in rows, Dale, which was really fun to do, and really enjoyed my conversation with Chris Durkin. Homegrown from DC United. They're super proud of that. He of course misses home and the chance that, family can just, come across town and see him play. Of course, he speaks to his dad being a very big help with him in terms of performance. He also speaks to the expectations of being a holding midfielder. I asked him, this squad has a tendency to rotate, and he said, it does, but I have been pretty much set. It's been nice to know going in that I still will probably have that as my role. And he says something that I thought you would like, that, if he's doing his job, he's invisible on the field. His job is to service the other players and make them look good, but that you hopefully don't hear my name too much because I'm just doing my job as a holding mid.
Well, I would say that when you watch, or when we watch Chris Durkin play, calling him a holding mid may not be the right terminology. We may have to call him a connecting midfield player, because his range and the way he gets around the field and disrupts is unique. He's very hard worker. He covers a lot of ground, so he's hardly holding. He's out ball winning and disrupting, and then connecting passes. So, will we recognize him? I think we'll recognize him when we're watching him. But I do think that he plays in such a simple way that he may get overlooked with his contribution, unless you're really honing in on him.
Dale, one of the things that Jen and I talked about just before the break at the end of our first segment was looking ahead to season 2 and some players who, whether they're new additions or holdovers from last year, because there wasn't tremendous turnover compared to what we necessarily expect from a typical expansion team in MLS. Anybody that you think is poised to sort of break out or take a step forward or otherwise end up with a bigger role by the end of the season?
Well, I think just starting with let's start with Totland. We spoke about him before, and I know he's a newcomer, so he's not a holdover. I'll get to holdovers in a second. But I think Totland, he's been so impressive with his game on the defending side, not to mention what he's like on the attacking side. So I think first off, fans are going to love watching him play and how good he is on the flank from a ball-winning side and from his ability to get forward. The other one, I'm going to go out a little bit. I think there's been such a high expectation on Joachim Nielsen and what he was going to bring to the team. And he had the injury. It was difficult for him a year ago. He couldn't quite find his rhythm when he broke into the lineup. The team wasn't playing its best, so he was in a team that had lost a few games, and I don't want to say it got hung on him that we lost games because of him. I don't think that was the case, but coaches are trying to find a rhythm and find the best group of players that have the best chemistry. So let's take where he was a year ago, and also knowing what the expectation was for him coming in. I think he's poised to have a breakout year. I really feel like he's one of the better center backs in the league from a ball playing perspective and from a defending perspective. He didn't quite fit into how the team was playing at that particular time, but he does have a tremendous upside. His experience, his ability. I would say that Joachim Nielsen, for me, is a guy to watch for to have a big year.
One player I wanted to ask you about, I think another person that we look to often to come up big and come up magical for City is Edward Leuven. And we know that we spent some time away. He did some preseason, but spent his time away doing the green card process, and that was kind of stressful for him. And, just talking with him there a little bit, it was great to catch up. But he looked like he was still kind of settling in, that he's excited for Champions League. And he also feels a little bit that, he's ready to approach the MLS season maybe in a smarter way training. We know that he's a guy who wants to be in every minute of every game, but learned a lot of lessons in terms of making sure his body is fit and that his mind is trained in for a very long season with all these competitions.
It's so hard for the guys coming from Europe to play in this league. We hear about it all the time, and when you see it firsthand, and you see the guys dragging themselves up and down an airplane staircase over and over and over for the whole year, you can see the wear and tear that it takes on them, both physically and mentally. And Leuven was certainly one of those guys you could see just was getting wore out as the year went on. But he's such a contributor, and he carried us. He and Klaus carried us for long stretches of the season. It felt like, during the year last year, that it would be hard for me to say that he would be the one that was ready to take a big step, because, man, at one point last year, and we were talking about him as maybe an MVP of the league or a newcomer in the league, or newcomer of the year. He had such a great start to the year. Then he just physically wore out. But smart guy, experienced player. He'll figure out how to make it last through the course of the year this year for sure.
Dale, we appreciate you as always. Hope you have a great first week of 2 games here. We'll hear you in just a couple of nights.
Wow. Yeah,
right?
Super excited, Joey and I. Jen, we're ready to roll. We're looking forward to having great broadcasts and the start of a season, and I'd love to see us get into the next round of Champions Cup and get a result against RSL. It'd be a great start to the year.
Yeah, let's get a little Joey and Dale travel internationally. I guess you guys made at least one trip to Canada last year, but let's get a little south of the border, Joey and Dale, if City can make it far enough.
I'd like to see that.
I want to see those hotel
Joey
pens that you get. I want to see the hotel pens you collect if you go to South America.
I was thinking more like Joey and Dale Beach Day kind of thing.
There you go. No, you don't want to see that.
That'd be good for the content. Dale Schilly joining us as always. Thanks a lot, Dale.
Thank you.
Dale Schilly, you can hear him on every City broadcast on our sister station, Y98, along with Joey Zanaboni and our own Jen Cease, who will be on every City broadcast now this year officially, including hosting the pre- and post-game for the away games as well. So a lot of excitement this season.
It's going to be fun, Kyle. You and me, buddy.
Kyle Sixto will be running the show as always. So if you hear any mistakes, it has nothing to do with them.
It's
just
Kyle.
It's all me. It's all me. Just Kyle. That'll start on Tuesday night, 7:00 kickoff on Y98 City, hosting Houston Dynamo in the Champions Cup, and then their MLS opener against Real Salt Lake on Saturday night. That's a 7:30 kickoff. Both of those at City Park. As always, same as we tell you for this show and everything on KMOX, you can hear those games and Y98 streaming live on the free Odyssey app. We'll take a break and get some of those comments from this week at City Park. When we return, it's the St. Louis City Soccer Report on KMOX.
Here's something you won't hear from any other jeweler. Right now, when you buy a diamond at Diamonds Direct, we'll give you a free gold setting for it. Yes, a 14-karat classic solitaire setting in white gold or yellow gold at no charge with any natural diamond purchase. So all your money can go toward a bigger diamond while you still get the classic look she wants in that engagement ring. Another example of Diamonds Direct's extraordinary value. Or if you want to take it up to the next level, Diamonds Direct also has a fantastic selection of halo, pave, vintage, 3-stone, and other popular mountings. Or maybe she wants a designer ring, like the one she's seen on social media. Well, Diamonds Direct has those too. In fact, we are an authorized retailer for all the top designers from New York and California. Whichever setting you choose, you'll also be able to choose your finance plan. Diamonds Direct now has a wide range of finance options.
on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
Nate Gatter, Jen Cease with you, rolling on with the St. Louis City Soccer Report on this Sunday afternoon. We'll be back with you again next Sunday before in March we transition to Thursday evenings. Anytime you miss us live on KMOX, you can also hear us streaming live or after the fact on the free Odyssey app. Jen, you had a chance to talk to a bunch of City players this week. I think
I did. I butted in front of
roster.
a bunch of media. I just cut in line and tried to get what I could
We're
get.
a team partner, so we get what we want. Let's start with hearing from a guy we've talked about a lot, Chris Durkin, new midfielder for City, on some of the differences between being at about as old a club as you can find in MLS in DC United and now a young club in St. Louis.
A lot of history at DC, and I was well aware of that as a kid coming to those games.
I bet.
Being coached by like Ben Olsen and who had been at the club for a long time. So luckily I've been around for a while now and seen a lot. This is my 8th season. So I'm hoping to bring my tools that I've learned into this team. A lot of
Old guy and an old club, and now he comes to a new club and at least a relatively young team, especially in the midfield, but one that has some experience. And it feels like, again, to the point that Dale has talked about, that he could be a real steadying hand, which I almost hesitate to use because it makes him sound like a real old guy. I think he's still very much in the prime of his career, but certainly that City will look to him as a steadying force in the midfield.
Absolutely. And there's somebody that is really happy to have him because he kept interrupting my interview, Joao Klaus. Super excited to have that. And I think that's going to create, obviously, the great players play together great on the pitch, but when you have also a connection where you've played elsewhere, I think that always helps.
Yeah, Chris Durkin, just to be clear, only 24 years old. So, I mean, he's not one of the old guys as compared to, he just has a lot of experience.
Yeah.
And what he's talking about in those 8 years, part of that was spent over in Belgium, where he and Joao Klaus played together. And Klaus talked to you about some of his work to try to bring Durkin here to St. Louis.
Oh, yeah, we had a great time together in Belgium. He's a great friend. So we were together when I got the offer from St. Louis. So I talked to him about MLS, about life in US, this kind of stuff. And when I heard that he had the chance to join us, immediately I called him. He was close to his marriage. I was like, Chris, come. You help us a lot. You fit in our system, and it will be nice to spend time with you again. So I'm very, very happy that worked out.
That's Joao Klaus, City striker, talking about recruiting Chris Durkin to St. Louis. Obviously, part of that is the personal element. They're
and
just
Durkin
friends.
recruited him, apparently. So they kind of both did it for each other.
Right. So it'd be fun to that's Klaus saying it'd be fun to hang out again. But also, it occurred to me when he said you'd fit in our system that with a player considering a move to St. Louis as compared to other teams in MLS, there probably would be a little more apprehension as to, am I going to be the right fit for this system? Because with City, as compared a little bit more than some teams that maybe play a more vanilla system, it's not only about your quality and your individual skill level, it's also about how do you fit into the collective. So hearing that, I'm sure, gave him even more confidence this would be a good fit.
And Dale bring up the fact that maybe holding midfielder isn't quite the right term, that he's more of a connecting midfielder. Well, we want nothing more than to make sure we're connecting defense transition out to people like Joao Klaus.
It's a good point. And there are very few central midfielders in MLS who can both handle the defensive expectations of being a holding mid without the ball and also being a connector in possession. And I think we saw that from Blom at times, that it was a real difficulty for him. As good as he was immediately when healthy in the defensive role, he did struggle at times with picking the right pass and being able to do it quickly enough to transition at the pace that City wanted and needed to. Speaking of connecting play and transitioning quickly, that's something
there's another guy we want with the ball, right?
Edouard Leuven can do a little bit more of. Hopefully he's not having to drop so deep to get on the ball as he was in the second half of the season, which I thought really undermined their ability to get out and make those incisive passes quickly. Leuven, of course, away from the team, well documented for stretches of preseason to go through the green card process, which is important because it opens up his spot as another international roster slot. He no longer needs to occupy one if he has the green card. Here are his comments on that process.
It was a very stressful experience, but also a good thing, because everything worked out, thank God. We are very, very grateful for that. I mean, I'm happy that I could be there in the first preseason camp. I kept training and tried to stay in a good shape, like I'm just happy to be back.
Edouard Leuven, of course, asked to keep up his training on his own, and that's probably easier said than done. People imagine,
I think it is.
I keep up my training on
do.
my own, but it's not the same thing.
I remember training for college going in, and it is not the same as when you get there and you are adrenaline. You're like they say, you don't run as your fastest unless you're racing somebody. I don't think you train your hardest unless you're training with people.
That's a good point, especially at this level, and especially now the quality of central midfield that City have. I mean, of course, Edouard Leuven expected to be the headliner. Nobody's speculating that Leuven's place in the team could be, in danger. But nonetheless, nothing wrong with feeling somebody at your heels.
That's
now
right.
And lastly, this transitions perfectly into our next segment, talking to George Ganser for Laws of the Game about what's going on with MLS refereeing, which is a major talking point going into the season and might remain one for some time, depending on how negotiations progress. City center back, speaking of foreign players with green cards, Kyle Hebert, about the ref lockout and maybe the outlook that he and potentially some of the other players have on it.
I mean, it's something that's outside of my control, and I think that's something that I've learned early on in my career is if I just focus on, there's a million things outside of my control that can impact a game, but if I just focus on what I control, it brings a level of confidence and reduces anxiety that way.
Speaking of things,
I didn't get as much out of him as I hoped, but
again, to the point of Leuven and like training away from team. Speaking of things easier said than done, we all know exist just as strongly outside of sports. We all know we should focus on things within our control. Don't dwell on things outside of our control. And yet here we are.
Good advice for everybody.
George Ganser will be with us next, former MLS, FIFA, and assistant referee for Laws of the Game, talking about that refereeing lockout and ongoing negotiations between MLS and its refereeing union. That is coming up next when we close out the first hour of the St. Louis City Soccer Report on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
The IRS definitely ramped up operations
Program and services not available in all states.
The Y98 St. Louis City Soccer Report continues on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
Former MLS and FIFA assistant referee George Gansner joins us now. Nate Gatter, Jennifer Cease, back with you on the St. Louis City Soccer Report. And those of you who were with us last year or even last week know what time it is at the end of the first hour.
Now, laws of the game.
George Gansner back with us, laws of the game. And George Gansner might be the only official MLS referee allowed to work right now here on the show.
That's right.
Because the rest of them voted to authorize a strike, and they did so, George, pretty resoundingly in a way that suggests not only will MLS be starting the season with replacement referees, but at least to me from the outside, suggests this might be still have a little bit of bitterness in it that would drag on for a while.
Yeah, so the vote was 96-4, right? And I got a couple of text messages within hours of the completion of the vote. It's resounding. I said last week that they are united. The leadership or the negotiating team, MLS came back apparently, and our pro came back and said this is our final offer. So they apparently told them, I've read, that it's not good enough, but we'll take it to the membership, and it was clearly not good enough. So I've heard some of the things that are on the table. A lot of it's quality of life. Some of the things that have been put out there as far as, how much of a percentage increase they're getting. It's not exactly that. It's not 25% overall. There's a very minimal amount that goes to the referees. It's more about the VARs. There's a lot of things like this. But Nate, what scares me the most is that the league is going to allow unqualified people to do these games and put the safety of the players, I said that last week, in those people's hands.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think obviously in any league, it's a common sentiment that the referees are bad, right? All fans think referees are bad, referees are biased. It's often the same with announcers, for that matter. All the announcers suck and they all hate my team. So bearing in mind, George, that all the referees suck and they all hate us, how much of a drop-off do you think even those jaded fans who already think that the referees are terrible will notice from the normal MLS referees to the replacements?
Well, let me let the listeners make their own opinions about this, and I'll just give you an example or two of a list that it's not even a list of people. It's a description of who the 66 or so people are that the league says that they, or that pro says that they have committed to do this. And what I heard from a very, very knowledgeable source is that, they said they have people with FIFA experience. I'm told that that's one person who is from Turkey, who lives in Dallas, and he spent 1 year on the international list in Turkey as a referee, and the majority of his games were at the youth international level. So that's who we're putting in charge of our top league. The other example, they said something about they have college people who have done Division I college. There is a significant reason that there are not a lot of referees who do college games working in Major League Soccer. So there are some, and they are really, really good. But there's a reason that we don't have a lot of players from college also in Major League Soccer. They've grown. The league has grown. Those players are there. They're really good at what they do. But that's the top of the top of the top. So again, the listener can make up their own mind on what this is going to look like. I have my very clear opinion, and based on the experience that we had in 2014, I really think this is going to be worse.
Major League Soccer, as you saw, I'm sure George on Twitter came out and elsewhere with statements, of course, with this and saying that this represented what they were offering, a 25% overall increase over 2023, making pro members would have made pro members among the highest paid soccer match officials in the world. And I know that you scoffed at that. And once upon a time, a long, long time ago, someone named Jen Cease computed, I know what it takes for an MLS soccer referee to go on the road and how many hours you're gone. And when you compute time away, travel, all the hours that go into being, the moment you leave your home to the moment you come back, it's not as much as we think.
No, I think, what did you calculate? It
was not very impressive.
Maybe $6 an hour?
No, it was like 12. I think you made $12 an hour overall when you came from stepping out to coming home.
Yeah, that was 20 years ago. So it's better now. There's no question that it's better now. But when the league has new teams, San Diego, St. Louis, coming into the league who are paying $500 million each to get into the league, when you have an Apple TV deal, when you have all of these things, and you're not willing to take care of the referees to a professional level, I mean, we're talking about even to a professional level here, not exorbitant. They're going to fly business class everywhere. That is one of the hangups, by the way, is how often the referees can fly business class without using their own upgrades. And Corey Rockwell, who does 30 matches a year, he went out on Twitter and said he's an assistant referee in the league, the most experienced. He came out on Twitter and said, this is the equivalent of I get to take 4 flights business class in 70 flights. Okay. Now, those 4, Corey lives in Phoenix, so it could be a 6-hour flight for him to get up to Boston. And he's flying coach. So, and getting off the plane, that's the equivalent of asking somebody to fly from New York to London, do a game the next day, and fly back to New York after the game. So this is the thing that's going on here. And I hope that this doesn't last very long, but I do think it's going to be a week or two.
George, we appreciate your insight as always. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you again next week, and I'm sure this will remain a theme of our conversations.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Former MLS and FIFA assistant referee George Janzer with us for Laws of the Game of the St. Louis City Soccer Report. Stay tuned. Second hour, Tom Timmerman, Megan McCormick still to join us. The news is next. You're listening to America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
Jewels on Hampton and St. Louis Hills is paying some of the highest prices on gold, silver, diamonds, semi-precious colored stones, coins, flatware, and
was very special what happened in our first year because you only have one inaugural season and you only have one first. And we did ours right. I think if there is pressure, the only pressure that we feel is from within us to perform at the same level we did last year, if not better, because we have new components, we have new players. So we're excited, and I wouldn't say we feel any outside pressure. And last year we felt no outside pressure either. Last year we felt pressure from within ourselves to perform every single day, and we held ourselves to a certain standard. And that's what gave us success. So I think so. We're going to try and do that this year as well.
That's Indiana Vassilev, St. Louis City midfielder, talking to our own Jennifer Cease this week. Always willing to give a good soundbite, that Indiana Vassilev, and I think the players have been totally genuine and totally consistent throughout, since even before last season started, and certainly since they got a taste of what it was going to be like at City Park, that they absolutely love playing home games.
Oh man, they are pumped. Like every player asked for, just even Chris Durkin himself was like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready." I'm like, "Did you hear good things?" He's like, "Heard fantastic things. I can't wait to see this place packed."
And just think about how much I think about this a lot. How much that affects your enjoyment as a player, and you really don't get a lot of choice in the matter. Some guys did, with the guys who transferred from Europe outside the league, but guys who are traded here or drafted here don't get a lot of choice. And how much, on the one hand, if you play for the Chicago Fire, you have the same job, which is to show up and try to win soccer games. The field is basically the same. The opponents are the same. The league is the same. On the other hand, it's nothing alike because you spend half your games playing in a 75,000 seat stadium for 12,000 fans. Like, that would just be terrible. It's going to make you feel like you're a minor league player. And then what do you know? They bring in a bunch of good players to Chicago who suddenly forget that they're good, probably because they feel like they're playing exhibition games all the time.
Yeah, to them.
That must be so invigorating. And if I were a City player, I think I would feel so fortunate. I mean, they've earned the right to be here, but so fortunate to not just be living the, professional player dream and playing in MLS and all of that, but getting the chance to do it in a place where they can be genuinely excited about the environment every home game. How would that not get you up and at the races for every single game?
Oh, and they're pumped for it because preseason games, I think one of them told me that, 5,000 or 6,000 came out when they were in LA, but it's not the same as a full stadium. It's not the same as your own fans. And he basically said, we're sick and tired of hearing each other. I said, because you can't hear each other at a game. They're like, that's actually preferable. It's probably good that we don't hear each other. And something else that you don't normally hear, at least I think is going to be new for fans, was something that we were able to hear a little bit in the stadium, is in that closed door practice, they had they even did yellow cards, and when somebody got one, you could hear the almost like American football. They turn on the connection to the PA, and they were saying, like, explaining what the call was, explaining why the yellow card was given, also a decision on VAR. So I think we're going to see what we had seen in the U.S. Women's World Cup and we've seen across the world. We're going to hear the referees more in stadium, and that will be, I think, new for many MLS fans.
It's been a worldwide push, I think, for just greater transparency with the refereeing process, especially as those processes become more complicated and in some cases more convoluted.
It's just now that we boo, we know what we're booing for.
Right. Another thing, this is so small, and it's really not even refereeing. It's just sort of game administration, but I've brought it up before, I think, and I think for fans who go to games, it makes a big difference. In MLS this year, they're going to stop having, they're no longer going to have the clock stop on 45 minutes or 90 and not show. It will keep counting up past 45 the way it would if you're watching.
Which is actually
TV,
helpful for broadcast because we know
time.
what minute that we're in. We have to use our phone to set the timer, right?
When I'm at a game, I have to remember to pull out my phone and start the stopwatch when it hits 45 minutes so that I know if there's 3 minutes of added time or 5, or especially if it's if it's in the second half, as higher numbers of added minutes have become routine. My first MLS game I ever attended actually was back in 2018, I think. It was a Sporting Kansas City playoff game against Portland, and there were a whole bunch. The second half was a whole mess. At one point, people were very upset about a Sporting goal that had been disallowed. This was early days of VAR. Sporting goal got called back by VAR. Fans were very upset. They were throwing a bunch of stuff on the field. The game was delayed because of it. Peter Vermees, the Sporting manager, had to come over and try to get Sporting fans to stop throwing things on the field. So they added on like 13 minutes at the end of the game. And this is it was a Western Conference final. It was the second leg. So the winner is going to MLS Cup. And it went, I think SKC were down a goal on aggregate going into the added time. But 13 minutes is a ton of time.
That is a lot.
And if the clock stops on 90, if you as a fan don't have a watch or your stopwatch out on your phone, you have really no way of knowing, but especially even if you have a good sense of time, once you get halfway into that, how are you supposed to know if it's 5 minutes or 7 minutes or 9 minutes? And for me as a fan, that affects, it affects the game, and I want to be aware of it. So also for the players, the system right now, if something like that happens, is just for the benches, as it might be relevant to be shouting out to the players. If you're down a goal, you want your players to know we have 7 minutes left in added time versus we have 60 seconds left in added time, because the degree to which they're totally selling out changes in those two circumstances.
What I'd be interested to know is, we know that when you're in added time, sometimes more time gets added because of antics and nonsense. I would be curious to know if they just keep the clock running for that. If they say there is another 2 minutes because we're having to add for an injury, but
keep it running.
I think you're right. In the absence of knowledge, people assume the worst, right? So sometimes you have people like, oh, that was this, and somebody's like, no, I actually had my phone out and it was this, and so it helps. I think sometimes not everybody loves transparency, but hopefully this is one that helps everybody.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was a reason people who are in charge of these kinds of things spend time thinking about the rules they write in the rule book and why.
Well, they've talked about it for a long time, so it took a bit to get to this decision.
And so I've never really heard what the rationale was for why the clock didn't just keep counting up and say, anyway, not really important. But for me, if you're somebody who goes to games,
we can ask George next time.
I think you might find that, at least for me, it'll be what used to be a regular, if not super significant annoyance that now I don't have to worry about. And that's, in the great words of Forrest
Don't
Gump,
have to start your phone. Yay.
One last thing.
There you go.
So Tom Timmerman of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch is going to join us next, and we are going to discuss any number of things, his impressions from preseason and what he's expecting this week and beyond. Hour 2 of the St. Louis City Soccer Report on KMOX.
Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine
Program and services not available in all states.
The Y98 St. Louis City Soccer Report continues on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
To be honest, it's with the team having a plane for themselves, it makes the traveling a lot easier. And in Norway and in Sweden, we were busing and taking a train for like 4 hours, 5 hours. So my team may say that we have to travel so long for some matches, but I think I'm like, no, you don't know long.
That's Thomas Totland, the new right back for City, coming over. He's Norwegian, coming over from Häcken in Sweden. And it's interesting because a lot of MLS players will complain about the travel, or at least if they don't complain, end up thinking the travel is a real challenge because they're used to traveling in much smaller
But I
countries.
will tell them, I didn't have the heart to tell them that some of those plane rides aren't that long too, just so you know.
It might be a little while. Also, remarkably good English for a guy who has never played in the U.S. before.
Well, his
and
mom,
is early 20s.
born in Vermont. So
Yeah.
he tells me his mom's born in Vermont. He spent a lot, many summers over in the United States. But as he said, not as far in as St. Louis. I thought that was a great way to put it. So
To venture to
welcome
the middle of this
into
big
the
shape.
middle of the country, Thomas.
He is now officially in the Midwest for the first time. Speaking of
Another Tom
guys,
Ish.
another
Tom.
Tom Ish, who ventured from the coast to the middle of the country. Tom Timmerman is with us from the Post-Dispatch, and you were back on the coast of the country as you once were, covering soccer some time ago for preseason camp. Tom, thanks a lot for being with us for the first time this year.
Well, thanks for having me, both of you.
What were your main impressions from training camp? Let's start. I tell you what, let's do this. In what ways, if any, did you notice training camp operated or felt different this year than last?
Well, there's less introductory teaching going on. People know the system, with the exception of Holland and Doer and Durkin. Everyone knows what's going on. And so it makes it easier to kind of tweak the system this year, which they're going to do so they can be better on the ball. So that when teams say, have the ball, try and do something, they're better equipped to do that. What that's going to look like, I can't really say I've seen that, but that's a big change. So it's more of kind of being able to develop this year rather than just teach.
So Tom, as we're looking at that in development and teach and players coming in, we've got some of the same scenarios last year. We've got new players, right, with European experience, not experience in the MLS. But I did talk a little bit with some of the other, the now veterans, right? So Thomas Ostrak, what last year was his first year. Even Edward Leuven had last year his first year in the MLS, and they had a lot of learnings from that. But we look around the roster now, we see a lot more players that have MLS experience, and that has got to help this team, I would think, in when it comes to bringing the newer guys along. And this is how you've got to manage yourself for the season.
Oh, definitely. And it's that's one of the things for this season is that, they really exceeded what they could do on the field last year, what they should have done. If you look at the stats, they played better than the results should have been. But this year, so you expect regression. But also this year, everyone's going to be better because everyone knows more. And guys like Leuven and Berkey have now been through the league, and they know when to go hard and when not to go hard. And so I think you're going to see a savvier team, in a lot of ways out there because they know what it's like, what a season in Major League Soccer is like.
Tom Timmerman, who covers City for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, is with us. You can follow him on Twitter at TomTim. Tom, we've been talking throughout the show about maybe some players who would be positioned for a breakout or otherwise to step up for City this year, especially among those holdover players who the fans know and love. Do you think there are any guys who, in your mind, either just because of how the makeup of the roster has changed or because of what you've observed so far, that you think are poised to play a bigger role for City this season than last?
Well, excuse me. How do you count A.Z. Jackson?
Yeah.
He's going to be better than he was at the start of the year. Well, he'll be probably better than he was at the end of the year, but he made such a big jump last year. But I think he's prepared. He's going to play a much bigger role this year. Everybody talks about Thomas Ostrak. This is a year for him to break out. It's his third year in the organization, so he's been around. He knows what's going on. And so I think he's the guy, who's going to get more of a chance and who's going to do more.
Yeah, they say he came in a lot more prepared this year. That it was several players who told me that
Well,
he
that
came
was
in
Jen's
ready.
pick. That was Jen's pick to jump to
I
break
have
out.
I
so-
have the sound bites to back it up.
yeah. So you're doing her a real favor here, Tom.
I aim to please.
So also talking with Blom, we had a chance to talk to Blom a little bit. It was nice to catch up, and he himself also kind of spoke about. We just looked at like what it looked like for him last year. You know, he was sick with, I believe it was COVID, correct? And then he comes back, and then he gets his groin injury, and he was also dealing with figuring out, I think adjusting not just to the culture, food, diet, hydration, travel. Now he says, traveling back to home, traveling around the United States is not so bad. He looks and seems so much more settled.
Definitely. And, he's the furthest away from home of anyone on this team. He was thrown into a situation that was tough there for the start from him. And he had ups and downs. He had the COVID, he had injuries throughout. He had trips back to South Africa for national team things. It's a good thing, probably, that he didn't get called into the national team of South Africa for the African Cup of Nations, because he would have missed almost all of training camp because of that. They went to the third place game, so they played a long time. So it was probably bad for him because he would have loved to have done that, but it was good for the club because he would have missed a lot of camp.
Tom, we appreciate your time with us as always, and we look forward to many more conversations. Have fun with even more games to cover this season, even more places to go, and we look forward to reading.
Thank you both, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Tom Timmerman of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch with us here on the St. Louis City Soccer Report. Jen, that's 1 point for you, I guess, even though the season hasn't started yet, that Tom endorses your pick of Tomas Ostrak.
Told you. No, it really was, when you're going from guy to guy and you're just like, hey, what's surprising you? And like more than one was like, Tomas Ostrak, like he must have come in with a mission and ready to go. And sometimes I forgot that Tom Timmerman pointed out is its third season with the club. You're thinking 2 seasons with the club, but third, it can take a little bit, and obviously has done what it takes to be in the off season to be ready to come in, ready to go and make his case, as Bradley Carnell likes to say, for more minutes on the pitch.
Just a quarter of the show left, about a half hour left with you after this break, but Megan McCormick still to come, academy coach for St. Louis City, and somebody that at least Jen has certainly wanted to get on the show adamantly for a long time. I have been perfectly well on board, but Jen would know better from their conversation. So she's been very excited to get Megan here to talk with you. They had their conversation on Thursday night at that Women in Soccer event at the Missouri History Museum. And now we will get to share Megan a little bit with you. If you've missed any of our guests so far, or if you're going to be away from your radio, but want to make sure to hear Megan's interview, that's the free Odyssey app, AUDACY. You can hear everything that happens on the show in podcast form, or you can listen to any of those Odyssey stations streaming live. Megan McCormick is next after this on KMOX.
Hey, this is Charlie Brennan. If you have exposed brick or
KMOX.
The Y98 St. Louis City Soccer Report continues on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
Just being around the first team, I think that's as a young player, I think that's what's most exciting, getting to train with all these elite players that played in Europe and like the big leagues. I think it's very exciting, getting that experience from them rubbing onto me. I think that's one of the biggest things for me. Yeah.
That was Christian Oliveras, City 2 goalkeeper, who spent time with the first team at the press conference, and truly, Nate, looked about as happy as anybody could be sitting amongst all the players in the first team, side by side with him, rubbing some shoulders.
Yeah, he had some good success last year with City 2, despite an injury that bothered him. And then City rewarded him with, a 2-year contract that he signed back in December, club options for another couple of years, so could tie him to the team potentially through 2027. Ben Lute still there as the number 2 goalkeeper behind Roman Berkey. Not that you saw him too often last season. And probably won't see him all that often this year outside of U.S. Open Cup, I wouldn't expect, barring an injury to Berkey. But obviously, Roman Berkey, we know, is not especially young. The lifespan of a goalkeeper is longer, but City, with their eyes on the future, as you always have to as a club, and Oliveras looks like potentially a good candidate, a product out of maybe not the academy, but at least out of the academy capping team in City 2.
That's right. And the reason I wanted to play him coming in, because I think our next guest coming on, Megan McCormick, she is the head coach of the St. Louis City SC U14 Pathway Program and the U16 Academy. And Megan, welcome in. I think it's always fun to talk about line of sight from the younger players like a Christian, and even those in the academy who may not always see the first team players, but you never know, could rub shoulders with them at any point in time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the show today.
Yeah, for sure. And it was so great. First of all, I got to go back to Thursday night, having you at the Missouri History Museum talking about women in soccer. Little did we know, I learned a little something about you. You think, everybody is all soccer all the time if they wind up in the game, but you were a reluctant soccer player. You're a basketball player turned soccer player from Indiana.
Yeah, I sure was. I think I told the story on Thursday, but I was like any good Hoosier, dedicated my life to basketball as a young kid. And then it was not until I was coming into high school that, growing up in a small town, the high school soccer coach was always recruiting, the best athletes from the area, and got a phone call, and the rest is history.
Megan, that's interesting because, we're in an era, obviously, of increased specialization for youth sports at younger and younger ages. Of course, the kids you have in the academy, even in their early mid-teens, are really talented soccer players. And in the cases of some of them, they have, bright futures ahead of them that will include the possibility of playing professionally. How, considering your background, are you still somebody who tries to leave room for kids or encourage kids to play multiple sports? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that comes up a lot, and I think it's a case by case, kind of conversation. And I think a lot of it is predicated on what are the goals, for that young person. What do they want? What are they aspiring to? And how, where does soccer fit in their life as a whole? And I think that that's a really important conversation. We do have a small number of kids in the academy who do, participate in other sports, and some at a pretty high level. It's obviously an exception, to have those kids in the environment that we're in, but certainly like in other environments, I think soccer can play a really important role, but I also know that there's so much that can be gained from representing a high school or playing at a club level and having space for other sports, and to really like be a more well-rounded athlete or maybe develop some leadership skills in other sports that maybe they don't have the opportunity to in soccer. I think, I think it's all a case by case basis. I've seen players who I think missed opportunities because they didn't specialize young enough. And they were still splitting their time at a really high level between a couple of different sports. And on the flip side, like, I think there are plenty of examples of players who maybe specialized too young and soccer maybe wasn't the sport that they should have, dedicated themselves at that young age in hindsight. But I think you don't know that sometimes until you look back on things. I think for me, like I was fortunate to maybe grow up in a really small town where the opportunities were still available for a player at, my freshman year of high school without a lot of, technical skills, without a lot of knowledge of the game. I think the game has changed so much in the last 15 or 20 years in this country, especially on the women's side and the girls' side. And so I think, it's more and more difficult if you don't have a certain foundational skill set to play at a really high level later down the road.
Whatever that age might be, Megan, I've been wanting to ask somebody this because I heard it it feels like a long time ago from a baseball coach, select baseball coach who had said, some of the toughest players he has to work with are those who had only been baseball players, that those who had been basketball players or whatever, football players, soccer players that had other skills and other mindsets to kind of dig into, that no matter which age they specialize in, do you find though that the multi-sport coming in does have a little bit more resilience, not only physically, but maybe mentally and emotionally?
I think it can definitely produce that. And I think there are kids that fit that bill. I think some of it is just really, as a young person and as a kid growing up, like being exposed to a really wide variety of just like athletic and physical pursuits, whether that's in a formalized way or if it's, playing in the backyard or in the neighborhood with like the neighbors down the street or running kind of wild, and kind of learning how to move and control your body physically. I think that's the most valuable thing, and really having like a diversity of kind of athletic skill sets. And I don't think that has to always come in an organized fashion. I think it's one of the mistakes that we make maybe in terms of being a multi-sport athlete for young people in this country is you have to play elite AAU and youth soccer and, maybe baseball and whatever else. And to do it at a really high level that requires so much time and so much specialization, as opposed to maybe prioritizing one of those things and then continuing to play basketball at a recreational level or continuing to play at maybe a lower level from a youth soccer perspective or whichever sport isn't the priority. I think we have a tendency to force kids down the road of, if you're not going to be elite at it, you have to quit. And I don't think that has to be the case. Like, I think you can still prioritize an academy soccer environment or a AAU basketball environment at a really high level and participate in other sports, but it's probably not going to be at an elite select or, a really sort of, high level maybe, but it doesn't mean you have to give it up altogether. I think that's a mistake that we make with kids at 12, 13, 14 years old is it's really black or white instead of like realizing that like there's a lot of gray area to continue to participate, to enjoy the sport and develop something mentally from a leadership perspective, resilience, and also athletically. But yeah, I think it's an interesting, I would say, like American phenomenon with like really young people.
St. Louis City Academy coach Megan McCormick is with us on the St. Louis City Soccer Report on KMOX. Megan, we have, on the spirit of sort of talking about youth development in a bigger picture lens, we talk a lot on this show about the accessibility of the youth game, particularly in soccer, and how that has undermined at times the growth of the sport and our national team success, particularly on the men's side. And the flip side of that being, with the now tremendous growth of MLS academies in recent years, and the way that gets at least some of our most talented players out of the pay-to-play system that might otherwise make it difficult for those kids to develop. How much do you probably don't think about it on a day-to-day basis, but how much of an impact from what you've been around do you think MLS academies have already made and are capable of making, especially on the men's side, with keeping some of those kids in the game through their teenage years who might become not just professional players, but potentially U.S. internationals and could have otherwise been financially limited, if not pushed out of the sport altogether?
Well, you'd be surprised how much I think about it. It's a lot is what I'll say. And especially like the places that I've worked in, kind of the background across the game, I think it's an incredible, luxury and sort of opportunity to work in a professional academy now where, to your point, like that pay to play barrier is completely removed. It doesn't remove all barriers. Obviously, there's, you've got to, figure out the support system around those players who might not have the financial means to participate at this level of the game. There's transportation. There's, it takes a village for any player to be successful, through academy ranks and then into, what we hope are professional pathways. It's never, a standalone endeavor. It takes not only a club and coaches and mentors, but it takes a massive amount of support outside of our environment for those kids to be successful in our environment. So I think like that's part of, I would say, the power of the growth in the MLS academies and removing that pay to play barrier, but also the support around it. We have a full-time academic success coordinator who oversees and helps make sure that the kids are successful outside of our facility in terms of the classroom and school, and then also helps coordinating transportation for kids that might have difficulty getting to and from training for whatever reason and all these other things. And so I think those sort of resources, I think the perception or the myth can be that it's about like turning over every rock and uncovering this like hidden talent and these like diamonds in the rough, which is obviously like one part of the equation. But once you've found that diamond, I think the real challenge, to your point, is setting up a system and the structures for them to be successful long-term in these environments that might be totally different from where they're coming from. And I think, removing the financial barriers has been massive to that. And I think the business model of, a successful league at the MLS level and the long-term kind of outlook on player transfers and signing these young talents and where the game is going in the next 5 to 10 years, I think you're seeing more and more investment from ownership groups in those academies, and they're seeing, the product and the value in that investment down the road. And so I think it's only going to continue to improve on the boys' side, I think, as we look at the next 5 to 10 years.
And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that, there are many, I'm sure more than City, but many clubs that are also reaching beyond the academy system into their, I think it's called City's Futures program, with Sasha Bauer runs that, and the kind of the mini pitches that have been developed across the area to start to integrate soccer and part of the culture and the accessibility to those that may be future academy players one day, but that kind of work into even additional parts. Maybe it's the recreational side a bit, but extending the game there as well.
We hope so. Yeah, I think that it's, we're fortunate to be in a city that has such a rich history and tradition around the game in a way that very few places in this country do. But I think it's to your point, increasing accessibility and making sure that there isn't any pay to play barrier for any kid that wants to participate and come to the game and learn about it, in any neighborhood in St. Louis or the greater kind of St. Louis area. And I think those mini pitches are going to be a big part of that as well. I know that even some of our academy players are in neighborhoods where those pitches have been opened, and it's been fun to hear the impact and see that they are using them, and that they seem to be full, all hours of the day, which has been incredible to see. And I think it is, for Carolyn and the ownership group at City, it's much bigger than just the academy and City 2 and the pathway within the professional kind of side of the club. I think it's really about trying to build on this like tradition and this interest in the game in the region and make sure that, we want to create professional players. We also want to create lifelong fans of the game and create all these really positive associations with soccer in young people, knowing that will, it will grow the fan base for the game as a whole down the road.
Megan, we really appreciate your time and your insight. Thanks a lot for being with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Megan McCormick, Academy coach for St. Louis City, joining us here on KMOX. We'll take a break and wrap things up when we return. It's the St. Louis City Soccer Report on KMOX.
Hi, I'm Ann Williams, General Manager
Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
The Y98 St. Louis City Soccer Report continues on America's Sports Voice, KMOX.
Wrapping up the St. Louis City Soccer Report on this Sunday afternoon, the penultimate Sunday show, I believe. We'll be back with you from noon to 2 next Sunday before.
Are we? I never got a confirmation on that.
we
Like,
make
are
the
we on?
transition. Is that right?
I don't know. We got to check with
Okay,
Steve.
I'm going to double check.
I'm
that.
gonna text Steve right now.
Yeah, so we're gonna figure out what's going on. Ultimately, we're gonna be transitioning to 8 to 10 on Thursday evenings in most cases.
We get to kind of do a game preview, more like
It'll be
a
the same.
closer
I think it'll be
preview.
look at the last weekend.
But like, if
and look
we're
ahead.
mad about calls, we have to wait a few days to talk about that
That's
with George.
true. Maybe
right?
that will be good for people. A little decompression time, right? It doesn't hurt. Don't say anything while you're
Don't
angry.
ask loaded questions like I do to George.
Right? Yeah.
Why was this so bad?
Yeah. Exactly. If you missed anything on this show, or if you're just concerned you might miss future shows, if the time change might throw you, you can always get the podcast of the show on the free Odyssey app. If you got any last minute questions or comments that we haven't addressed, now's the time. You got about 5 minutes to call 314-436-7900 to call us and get your thoughts on the air. Jen, obviously now it's go time again for year 2. I'm not sure the circumstances could be more different going into week 1 this year than they were going into week 1 last year.
We weren't in Champions League last year.
There were no expectations last year. The expectation was don't finish last. I'm not even sure that was the expectation. That was the goal, was don't finish last. The hope, I think, was somehow find a way into the playoffs. Which with the play-ins and things would have meant finishing in the top 9 spots, which felt ambitious. Then City ran out and took all the points that were available the first month and change and totally changed the outlook on the season. Seized the number 1 spot in the conference a couple of weeks in and then never let it go. Yes, they did ultimately sort of crash and burn in those 2 games against Kansas City in the playoffs, but a phenomenal regular season, certainly a phenomenal start. As a result, this year, they come in with a level of expectation, especially because I think most people feel, and myself included, they did a really good job handling what they needed to in the offseason and addressing some major needs at fullback and in central midfield, that this is a team now with expectations it got a taste of in the latter half of last season when they had established themselves as not just an expansion team, but somebody who was just a flat-out good team. This is different of going into a season with a target on their back in terms of the opposition and with high expectations in terms of their own fans' outlooks. And they still got plenty of haters, the people who say, according to the expected goals table and all the advanced analytics, not only should they not have been top of the table, they should have been at or near the bottom of the Western Conference, that they got, this amazing finishing luck in their favor, whether that was great finishing for them or Roman Berkey having a near MVP caliber season. All of that is to say, I feel it's almost impossible for them to do more of a 180 from where the mindset was, at least on the outside among the fans and the media at this time last year, now to what it feels like for year 2.
Well, there's for certain, and they talked about that, there's expectations and they're trying to make sure that they have high standards. But I think I wish I had the clip ready on hand. I don't. But Edward Lubin kind of actually spoke to that. He said something to the effect of, I think the analysts were saying, like, if they had clinched at 7th place or so, something lower, that they could have actually gone further in the postseason. Also having a postseason a little different for some of the European players. Right. He's like, when you're down in Germany, when you win, you win, you're done. You don't have to go anymore. So, I think there's a lot of that as well. And there was something else that you mentioned that was reminding me of something one of the players said. I'm trying to think of what that was, but talking overall about how, there are expectations. Oh, I think it was Kyle Hebert talked about been working on adding, in a quote, layers to their play, right? We know that the City, the press, it's exciting and it's awesome when it works. And what I think they were challenged with last year was what happens when it doesn't. It won't always. Sometimes it'll work, but I think it took a bit for them to figure out what are we going to do when the other team's got our number, when they're doing something that's figuring it out, and that they have been working on adding some, quote, like I said, Kyle Hebert, layers to their play. And I expect to see that in what that might look like. Format changes. Maybe we change our approach. Maybe we don't go down such a congested middle all the time. Maybe we learn to use more the wings and attack from the outsides. It'll be interesting to see what Coach Carnell has in his bag of tricks. And we know he has many.
Certainly, we know he has many. And I that is going to be an additional challenge for them this season. I want to clarify quickly, there would not be a St. Louis City Soccer Report next week because that's the first weekend of Cardinal spring training baseball. So
that would make a lot of fans mad. So we won't do that.
Right. The Cardinals will be on KMOX starting next Saturday, 6 days from now, the 24th, and they will have their second spring training broadcast on KMOX next Sunday afternoon, the 25th. So we will be away from you until March 7th. So we'll be off the next 2 Sundays because that following week we'll be transitioning to the Thursday format. So March 7th, Thursday, 8 to 10, and that'll transition us right into the Thursday evening slot. There will be a little bit of tinkering with that here and there because of baseball, but for the most part, we will be Thursdays 8 to 10 for the foreseeable future.
Be coming here when
March
it's
7th.
dark outside and not bright and sunny outside, which it looks because it's going to get warmer this week. That's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be
looking forward
different
to that.
than what you're used to. So, I mean, how many games will they'll have already played by the time we're back on?
Oh man, we're gonna have a lot to cover.
They've already played 4 games for sure.
What?
And I think
Is it gonna be 4?
Potentially 5. It'll be both Champions Cup legs against Houston and the first 2 MLS games against Real Salt Lake and NYCFC.
Ooh, we really got to start thinking about what that looks like for 2 hours. We need more than probably 2 hours.
Right. We're going to need 4 hours. And I think based on what Dale said, potentially if they were to beat Houston and advance to the round of 16 of the Champions Cup, that first game might slot in then between the New York City game and Austin, that first full week of March, in which case they might have played a 5th game before we're back on the air. So there's going to be a lot to do, a lot to get to.
So don't ask me for predictions because that's way too many things to predict.
That's too many. Who knows what could happen? But for City fans, that's 3 out of their first 4 at home. Just the second leg against Houston away. The first 2 league games against Real Salt Lake and New York City are also here at City Park. So a chance to try to push these guys off to a good start because if they slip up early in the season, that noise level around them in terms of they were getting lucky with X, Y, and Z last year, the regression is catching up to them. That's going to get loud quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, it'll keep definitely Matt Pauley busy in Sports Open Line. And I'm sure Tom Ackerman as well will be covering in their normal sports shifts. Soccer is a part of that. They talk to Lutz. They talk to Bradley.
And if they're not, call in and yell at them.
That's right. And I fully expect them to give one of us 2 a call so we can catch up with that and make sure that we cover that as well.
That'll do it for us this afternoon. Hope you've enjoyed today's show half as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. Hope you'll cope with a couple of weeks without us. Thursday, March 7th, 8 o'clock. We'll be back with you. For Kyle Sixto running things, my partner Jen Cease, all of our guests today, Nate Gatter saying so long. St. Louis City, Houston Dynamo on Y98 Tuesday night. This has been the St. Louis City Soccer Report on KMOX.
Jules on Hampton in St. Louis Hills is